So welcome to the TestComplete 201 SmartBear Academy. Without any further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Ian and Nick just to go over a little briefly on the SmartBear history and quickly on our portfolio, and then they're going to dive right into the agenda and training.
Awesome. Sounds good. So I'll take the first slide here. So this is just meant to serve as an overview as SmartBear as a company. When you're looking at other tools, when you're evaluating solutions, in many cases, the organization you're doing business with is going to be as important as the tool, because you want to make sure that you're going to receive the support you need, and you want to make sure that they have credibility within this space. There's reason to listen to them, reasons to explore the offerings they put out. And this is a slide meant to demonstrate some of the reasons why you might want to listen to us. So SmartBear is a global company. We're in fact in 194 different countries, and we do business with 22,000 different companies. Our products are used every single day. In fact, we average a new download of one of our products every 3 seconds, and that's products across the board. Down at the bottom there, you'll see those 3 listings. Those explain a few of the benefits you can realize when going with SmartBear tools. We're going to help accelerate your workflows. We're going to make sure that the products you're producing are of highest quality at every stage in that life cycle. And we're going to make sure that when you adopt these tools, you're able to see those benefits immediately without lengthy configuration stages or weeks stuck in the mud, so to speak, before you really get going.
So you can see on the left-hand side and on the top, it's really split up between the front end and the back end, as well as, where the product fits in the software development life cycle. So all the way on the left-hand side, we have dev, whether it's, on the front end with Code Collaborator or on the back end with Swagger Hub. Going to the right, we have TestComplete, which we'll, of course, be covering today. And on the back end, we have SOAP UI. So there's a few others on there, but I won't go into great detail on them. Just know that we have a plethora of different products to cover all of your business needs.
Yeah, this is another SmartBear benefit, right? As you begin to explore the offerings you have, maybe you start saving time with some automated testing through TestComplete, or start finding time here and there, you're going to have more available space to do more and more. And we've got a huge portfolio that'll let you grow with us, so to speak, as you begin to expand into other areas of your organization and business. Moving on to the agenda, this is an overview of the things we're going to be working on today, stuff we're going to be looking at. So, for instance, we're going to get an overview of the code editor, as today's demonstration is purely geared towards scripting within TestComplete. We'll talk about some of the various languages available to you, enumerate some of those options, and then we're going to get right into some of the neat things you can do with scripts within TestComplete, and specifically scripting objects. We're going to go over things like calling project items from scripts. We're going to look at how we can do neat things with regular expressions and exception handling, as well as some look at the end about how we can be asynchronous with how we call our functions and have our scripts execute.
So first on the agenda, like Nick had mentioned, we're going to cover the code editor. So I just want to point out, some of the features within here, very basic to begin with. So once you have a function that you've written, you can easily run it by just clicking the run button up here. There's a few other options as well. Maybe you just want to decrease or increase the indentation within your code. Also, you can mark selected text as comments or remove the comments. There's a few others up here. Perhaps you want to add a checkpoint via wizard, but we won't go into great detail with the other ones.
Another thing worth noting here is that this script editor is meant to serve as something similar to an IDE, right? So you can do all those things you'd expect to be able to do. We're not going to cover them today, but this means things like creating breakpoints or making a watch list, getting a view into all your local variables, importing function libraries. You can even customize the look and feel of it as well. It's designed to be flexible so that it can adapt to what you're used to working with.
Yes, and speaking of adaptability, so for those of you going from keyword test to script, it's very easy to, make that transition, because you can use a lot of the same tools that you have at your disposal within the keyword test. For instance, maybe you just want to, record how you normally would in a keyword test, but convert it into script. So you could just click this arrow up here and choose record into script and do just that.
I use this feature all the time. I'm very comfortable with scripting. I prefer it to doing a purely UI-based approach, but In no way does that mean that I enjoy writing the same line of code to invoke a browser over and over and over again. So I use that as an intermediate step. I'll record a skeleton of what I want to build, and then I'll flesh it out right within the IDE by using that record to script capability.
Awesome.
Hey, real quick, what version of TestComplete are you using? We had a quick question come in.
Yeah,
which I'm
sure.
some
So
others are wondering.
yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. So this is the latest version, latest and greatest of TestComplete. It's 12.5.
Yep, and this is something you could get access to if you are on maintenance, so to speak. You can download the newest version straight away, or maybe you haven't poked around with TestComplete yet and you're going to hop into a trial. Well, were you to start a trial now, you would get this version. And in fact, if you're on a trial, you'd be able to update too. I'd encourage you to make the switch. There's a couple of neat things in here that you won't find in the other versions.
Awesome. Yeah, I believe we had a webinar, or there is a webinar coming up to discuss that specifically.
Yeah.
All right. So, that's the general overview of the code editor. Next, we're going to talk about the various scripting languages that are supported within TestComplete, as well as, some of the specifics of common usage across those languages. So first of all, the scripting languages that are supported include JavaScript, which I'll be using today, as well as JScript, Python, VB script, Delphi script, C# script, and even C++ script.
This speaks right to that flexibility point I was talking about earlier. There are other tools like this in the market, but they're going to try to shoehorn you into using just one language, and you'll be somewhat out of luck if it's something you're not comfortable with. This tool is designed to consume various different scripting languages so that you can use something you're comfortable with. This speaks towards flexibility as well as that time to value. Nobody wants to learn a new coding language while they're also learning a new tool, so we've built this flexibility in here for just that purpose.
Awesome. So with that said, let's talk about some of the specifics of common usage across those languages. Excuse me. For example, there's a lot of objects or scripting objects within TestComplete that are common across those languages, including AQ convert. And we'll get into some of these when we cover the helper objects, but we have AQ convert, AQ environment, AQ object, things of that nature. Also, maybe you want to manipulate your log. So the log object is definitely a very common one used in all of those languages.
Yeah, there's definitely consistencies regardless of what you go with, and those consistencies tend to be related to the objects we provide to you. We'll be going over these objects during today's demonstration, but in general, you're going to be accessing them and utilizing them the same way, whether you're in JavaScript or Python or any of the other languages available to you.
All right. So before we get into the scripting objects, I think it would make sense to just stop and make sure we have any question or check if we have any questions.
Yeah.
So let's just take a few moments to do so.
Okay, we're just hopping right in here. Okay, so hopping right down. So is C# script the same as the C# programming language? And the answer to that is no, it is not identical. It is designed to be very, very similar. I don't want to get too deep into the specifics between them, the things that the things that separate them. But in general, if you're comfortable with C#, you'll be able to hop right in and pick up C# script immediately.
All right. So there's another question. How about Java? So Java is not currently supported within TestComplete, unfortunately.
That might be changing soon, though. Keep your ear to the ground. Awesome. So there's a question here. So we're discussing these different scripting languages, and it's been asked, so can I create a script, or create a test using the user interface and then save that to whatever scripting language I'd like? And the answer is not exactly. You don't have that choice at a script by script level. This gets a little bit into how projects are designed within TestComplete, but in general, all the scripts within a given project are going to be of the same language. And you're able to specify the language you want to leverage within that given product.
All right. So there's another question. If there's already existing project done in VB script, can we add new features in JavaScript in the same project? So regarding that point, the scripting language is project specific. So once it's set, unfortunately, it can't be changed.
Yeah.
However, you can just create a new project and specify the new scripting language in there.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on. All the questions we don't answer in the moment, we're going to circle back around to and reach out about. So feel confident that you're going to get these answers. Awesome. So the first thing we're going to be discussing today, the first method or object we're going to be leveraging is our project items object. One of the real benefits of TestComplete is that you can share the work you've done around throughout the tool. So for instance, if you have a script you've created elsewhere or a keyword test you've generated, you'll be able to call it right into whatever new script you're building. The syntax is enormously easy to access. So in this specific case, Ian's typing something out right there. This is a line of script that's going to pull a test out of a different project we've built. But you can also pull other things out as well. If you've got a variable defined elsewhere, or perhaps a keyword test tied to the project suite level, you'll be able to pull all of those out just using those keyword tests modifier. Yeah, and the syntax for that, again, is the project.keyword tests, and then you'll be able to access anything tied to that.
Yeah, so like Nick had mentioned, it's very straightforward. So, you know, if you want to call a project test item, it's just project.test item. If you want to call a variable, it's project.variables. You know, that kind of alludes to our 301 next week, but you can also even grab variables within another project by sharing them across your project suite.
And as we all know, variables are at the heart of all resilient scripting. It's how we're going to manage information well. This is a plug. I am doing that, but we do have a 301 session coming up next week that is purely centered on variables. And we'll talk about scoping variables to different levels, invoking them in different ways, and passing them around. But for now, what we just wanted to demonstrate with that quick object is how it's very easy within scripts to invoke items that live elsewhere. Again, be they variables, be they keyword tests, or even other scripts, you'll be able to bring them in wherever you need so that you can be flexible with how that information is passed around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch on one of the points that Nick just made. So it's very easy to import a function from a separate script. So maybe I want to import a function into my unit 1 right here. I could find that script within my Project Explorer panel, right click on it, and just choose import functions. So if I have multiple functions within that, I could select multiple if I would like, but maybe I just want to go with the only one that's in there.
And again, this is designed to make it easy for you to share this around. It's very tough to create a robust framework if all your scripts are siloed and only doing one thing and creating methods and functions that are only usable within it. So this is going to help facilitate that methodology where you pass these around.
Awesome. So we covered quite a bit there. So let's take a couple more questions and then let's move on to the next topic, which is helper objects.
Yeah, and Ian's going to take a look at those questions now. I'm just going to state this so that next up on the docket is those helper objects. And these include objects that are going to help you work with external data sources, objects that are going to help you get information about the system your test is running on. There's all sorts of neat things that are available with these helpers, and they are constant across the languages. So you're not going to be locked out of any of them because of your language of choice.
All right, so there was another question, and it was regarding the record to script and whether that was available pre 12.5, and the answer is absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, and there's another one from Kunal Malik. Is there a keyword shortcut or keyboard shortcut to add multi-line comments? And yes, there is. So it's this one right up here. It looks kind of like a green cylinder.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so we're just going to run down the scripting languages that are supported one more time. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with regards to this, and Ian's going to help me out because I always forget one or two of these things. So the supported languages are JavaScript, JScript, Python,
VB
script, C++ script, C# script, and if you're feeling really old school, Delphi.
All right, so there was another one. Can I convert the code from one language to another? So unfortunately, currently that's not a feature available within TestComplete. Also, there was another one. What about Python? And yes, that is one of these supported scripting languages.
Okay, scrolling right down. Scrolling right down. All right. So we've got a question from Scott Stevens about how is import different from use unit? And the answer is that they are very, very similar in practice. In fact, they're nearly identical. There are a few edge cases where they won't behave the same, but I don't want to derail this by going into that minutiae today. So here's my answer to you, is that if you're working on something and you're trying to figure out that difference, absolutely reach out. Ian and I are 100% available to do one-on-one sessions to help you walk through any of these things in more detail, if that's something you desire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to take one more question here, and then we're going to move on to helper objects. So this one's from Jeff. Is there any advantage to one language over another? And the answer is no, because it really comes down to what language you're most comfortable with, because the scripting language that you choose has no effect on, or it's not related to the application that you're testing.
Yeah, there is no benefit with regards to pure functionality. If you stacked it out and listed what can I do in this language versus that language within TestComplete, those columns are going to be identical. That said, I know many people that would tell me that JavaScript is much better than Delphi or something like that. So it really is up to your personal preference.
Absolutely. So, all right, let's go ahead and jump right into our helper objects. So I had mentioned a couple of them when we were talking about the specifics of common usage for all languages. So some of those include, like you can see on my screen here, AQ date time. So for example, maybe you want to grab the current time at a certain point in a script, or maybe you want to convert your date time object. So currently within this time interval demo function, I'm grabbing a time and then adding time to it.
This is great. I use this all the time when I'm working with clients that have calendar widgets or something similar where they need to mutate the date they're inputting based on today's date. This is excellent for doing that, as well as any other kinds of conversions you might need to make within your application.
All right. So another one I want to point out is AQ environment. So maybe you want to ensure that a certain extension is installed within TestComplete. That's how you would do that. That's kind of an edge case, but it's still a helper object.
Yeah, there's a lot of neat stuff in here. The one that I use, the one I was using this morning, is AQ system information. So this will help you get information about the system the test is running on, and this helps you perform a couple of interesting things with TestComplete. For instance, one of the neat things TestComplete's going to let you do is distribute the tests you've made out to other boxes to be executed. Using AQ system info is going to help you put logic into the tests themselves so they know what to do based on the operating system or general environment it's been placed within, without forcing you to have multiple copies of a test for specific environments.
All right. Another one I want to focus on is AQ convert. So maybe during or when you're running a test or creating a test, rather, you need to convert an int to a string like we are doing here. That's a perfect example of where you would want to implement this object here. And it's probably one of the most useful helper objects.
I'm going to take a second to answer a question we've got in here. So we talked all about importing and using unit and all of that, but that was all geared towards objects and functions from within the same project suite. What about if we want to bring something over from a different project suite? So there is no direct way to do that through scripting. However, you do have that capability. If you right-click on script, you can import existing scripts into your project, and you'll then be able to leverage them from there. So for instance, if we have two separate project suites and one of them has a test or a script that we want to leverage in here, you could import it right over. And Ian is showing you that workflow right now. Little red flag though, a little warning. they are then linked once you've imported it over. So if you import a script to your project suite and then think, well, wait a minute, I don't need that, and then delete it, the original is going to be gone as well. So think twice before acting hastily.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've actually done that myself a couple of times. So
Yeah.
if you're gonna import a script like that, definitely be careful.
You can always tell when something like that's happened because you can hear it anywhere on the floor. You can tell when somebody's made that mistake.
Exactly. So another one I want to focus on in terms of helper objects is AQ object. So let me scroll up and just find that within my very large function library.
Yeah, so while Ian's talking through that, we're just going to discuss really briefly why you might want to use scripting within TestComplete at all, right? Because the UI offers so much. It's designed to give you everything. Why would I want to script at all? And, well, there's a couple of answers to that question, really. One of the things I would say is that the tool is very much designed so that you don't lose out on any functionalities between one approach versus the other. So you're not going to be leaving anything on the table. You're not going to be giving up the capability of doing something just because you decided, hey, we're going to go keyword test, or hey, we're going to go script. That said, one of the reasons I can say I personally use scripts is it can be quicker. Instead of having to record, wait for the computer to respond, get into the application, if you know what you're doing, you can hop in and write those lines of code out straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found my AQ object function here. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to manipulate an object. So for instance, in this function here, we're actually setting a property value. So maybe you want to manipulate an object in your name mapping. You could absolutely do that this way. And that's not the only method associated with that object. So let's just take a look at a few others that are pertain to that. So for instance, maybe we want to call a method of an object. So this is similar to using the call object method command within a keyword test. We can also do a check property. So maybe you do want to do a property checkpoint in your script. We can also compare properties, and there's a bunch of others in there as well.
Yeah, AQ object shows up all over the place, and it kind of leads into one of the easiest ways to get into scripting within TestComplete, because it can be a little bit daunting. Maybe you don't have a ton of scripting experience. Maybe you don't have that high-level technical background. One of the good things about the way we built scripting within TestComplete is there's nothing too crazy out here. It's designed to be easy to wrap your head around. And one of the things I recommend when I'm conducting trainings with a group of fresh individuals new to scripting at all, build out basic keyword tests and convert them. See what it comes up with. See how the script handles these checkpoints. That's going to be an easy way to have that guiding hand that shows you what it's supposed to look like as you build confidence in doing it all on your own.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Also, another one I want to point out is AQ string. So, whether you're using keyword tests or scripts, you're going to be constantly working with strings. So this is going to be a very helpful object to use. For example, in here, maybe, we want to add to a string. Maybe we want to get the length or get a specific character within a string. Maybe we want to trim a string down. There's a lot of different things that we can do with this object.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that some of the things you can do with these AQ objects are duplicated functionality, things you can do within the language themselves. The reason we have all these different objects that seem to be duplicates is that they provide a consistent way of performing the same action, regardless of the language you land on.
All right, so we've covered quite a bit for the helper objects. Let's take a couple more questions, and then we'll move on to handling exceptions and handling events. So this one is from Michael. My company has moved to scripting most of our tests. We will use the keyword test format to create individual test cases, but actions and functions within our testing scope are globalized, including our verification functions. I'm just going to skip ahead to the question. Is there a way to script those without using the wizard first? So regarding the checkpoints, absolutely. So for instance, I covered that when we were talking about the AQ object. So you could use a property checkpoint in there as well as the other checkpoints.
Yeah, and this is a great example of something where if you're having some difficulties, if you're feeling like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, I just tried this, absolutely reach out. We want to be able to help you with this. It is 100% what we're there for. So, step up to the plate and let us know if you need this assistance. We're more than willing to give it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to that, there's a lot of very helpful documentation. So, if you're having trouble with something, I would definitely take a look at that. But yeah, like Nick said, we're always here to help.
Yeah, so here's one question I want to tackle from Ignacio. So is scripting more stable than using keyword tests? If I have a keyword test, it's not running cleanly, things are going wrong, objects aren't being identified, will switching to script help me? So can it? Yes. Is it going to be as easy as just flipping to script? No, not really. And here's why. Regardless of whether you're using keyword tests to define TestComplete's actions or scripts, they're all referencing the same place. All these objects we're interacting with, all of the neat things we're doing here, when it comes to interacting with objects on web pages or desktop apps or mobile applications, it all ties back to the name mapping. So if your name mapping is, let's say, poorly defined, if it's not doing a good job of identifying objects, simply switching to script is not going to help with that. That said, if your testing process is unstable because you're having a tough time keeping track of the information, if you feel like there's extraneous steps, if you're having difficulties passing information around and you want an easier way to see at a more mechanical level what's being done, then scripting absolutely would be able to help you.
Awesome. So this next question is from Lance Scott. Is there any concerns that you're going to no longer support one of the scripting languages that you currently provide? So I converse with our product owner pretty frequently, and as far as I know, there's no plans to do away with any of the scripting languages.
Yeah, I don't believe any of them are set for sunset at any time in the future.
Okay, so here's another one from Chris Needham. So this is the last one for now, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. Can you convert a script to a manual test? Can you generate a document saying what the script does? So currently, unfortunately, that's not a feature within TestComplete. We do take feature requests. That goes for all of the questions that have been asked. So if you feel that would be advantageous for your company or your team, please let us know. However, I just want to point out that if you do, record into script, it will also include comments within the script. So that can be a nice alternative there. Okay, so let's hold off on further questions for now, and we'll jump into handling exceptions as well as handling events.
And there's two different categories here, right? And that's important to note. We threw them in on the same line, but exceptions and events are actually rather different things when you get right down to it. So again, just as an overview, when we talk about handling exceptions, we're handling errors within our script itself, type mismatches, objects not being available, truly failures in the process that we need to have recovery steps in place for. Events are far more generic than that. You could create an event handler that fires anytime a test is finished, whether that test succeeded or failed. If we want something to be done, that's a perfect job for an event handler. I just wanted to break that out really quickly. While these are both ways of assessing information or taking in what just happened and acting upon it, exceptions are going to be tied very strongly to failures in our scripts or keyword tests, whereas events can be anything, really.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. So let's look at handling exceptions first. So I have a function here where I'm sending an email out, and I have it encapsulated within a try-catch loop here. Basically, I'm saying, all right, try to do this which is essentially just going out to my email server and saying, hey, send this email. Otherwise, catch it and throw an exception. So we can use this to basically find out what's going wrong within our function and debug it, essentially.
Yeah, this is just going further with that concept. Try, catch, finally blocks, those aren't a test complete invention. Those of you with scripting or coding experience will realize that this is something that's present all over the place. But in test complete, it can be especially beneficial. For instance, I was working with a client recently that was doing a conversion of a property of an object, and the object wasn't always present at that point in time. There are a couple of different ways they could tackle it, but what they ended up going with is they created a try catch finally. They knew if there was an error in the assignment because the property wasn't present, they needed to requery the object, drive some specific page actions before throwing an exception at the end. So that's something that they were able to build out.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's just that's a pretty simple example. It looks rather extensive, but what we're really doing is just essentially sending an email. So let's make sure we don't have any questions on that before we move on to handling events.
Yep. And while we're looking at those questions, I just want to revisit try catch finally. For those of you who maybe haven't heard of that before, don't really understand, just at a high level, what try catch finally, what it does is you're telling the program, you're telling test complete to try to perform these series of actions. If an exception occurs, it goes to the catch block and performs whatever instructions are there. Then, when it's done performing everything it should try and catching any exceptions, it is going to perform what's left in the finally block.
All right. So bear with me one moment here. So this one's from Lucio Gayoso. Are the QA objects, I believe you mean AQ objects, available in versions previous to version 12.5? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. And the second part is, if so, how are they accessed? And it would be in the same way that I had shown here in the code editor.
Yeah, if you have test complete in front of you by whatever chance, you should be able to pop into script regardless of the version you're currently using and just type AQ, and that IntelliSense should show up and show you all the different things we have available to us. So again, we see that AQ convert in date time, AQ environment. It's all going to be present right in there.
All right, let's take two more and then we'll move on to handling events.
Here's one. So Megan Henson has a question about whether it'd be possible to use scripting to create a loop so that we can repeat an action multiple times to test how robust the forms are. And the answer to that is absolutely. That is an excellent use case for scripts. You'll be able to build out a loop, perhaps a for loop, that will iterate across those actions again and again until the required criteria has been met. You 100% can do that. And although this is scripting, I will throw out that you can build those loops within your keyword tests as well, using some of the objects that live within them.
All right, let's take one more question. Can you use helper objects within keyword tests? And yes, you absolutely can. So the best way to access them would be to use the call object method function within your keyword tests. Then you can just specify that same object the same way you would within script. So I'll just demonstrate that really quickly, and then we'll move into handling events.
Yeah. I just want to throw this out here. So we've gotten over 100 questions so far into this chat box, and there is no way we're going to get to all of them. So if you are one of the perhaps unlucky ones that leaves this without your question answered, and it is a burning question, something you really need to know an answer to, it's blocking your process, or it's something that's going to be make or break as you're evaluating, please, I encourage you, reach right out. Dana's going to throw her email into the chat. You'll be able to send it to her, and she'll be able to triage that information and get it right back to us so we can help resolve that for you.
Yeah, and so while I'm showing this, this is how you would call an object's method. So like we were just doing in script. And as you can see from this list, even if we had like 5 hours on this webinar, we wouldn't be able to cover all the intricate details of these scripting objects. So it really goes to show how in-depth TestComplete goes with these. All right, so that covers handling exceptions. Now let's take a look at how we can handle events within TestComplete. So let me just give you, a scenario where you would typically use an event handler. Let's say maybe every time your tests start, you want a function performed or some sort of action performed. You could use an event handler to do that. Now, that granted, that's only one example. There's various different ways you can use that, but that's what we're gonna use in this example here. So I'm gonna create a new event handler for onStartTest. So essentially, I'm just going to create a new script to hold that event handler.
What we're doing here is we're saying, okay, this is the event I want on test start, and then the script is going to be the instructions that are followed when that event occurs.
Okay, so yeah, exactly like Nick had mentioned. So this is the event here on start test, and here's what I'm telling TestComplete to do when that event occurs. So maybe I want to run a browser every time. So maybe I want to tell TestComplete every time I start a test, open up Firefox or something like that. So it could be an action, or it could be a property checkpoint. It could be a delay. It could be a lot of different things.
Here's one example. I can talk all day about the event handler because it's one of the best ways to really extend TestComplete's functionality, but I was working with a client that actually had a data set that they used every single time, and it needed to be reloaded into the application at the beginning of each run. So they just whipped up a little event that said, hey, every time our test starts, before our test executes, we're going to perform this set number of instructions that query the right data from their database and populate it into the environment. There's all kinds of neat stuff you can do with this. I'm going to give one more example because it's something I was working on literally this morning. So one of the neat things you can do that kind of takes together all of the different AQ functions we were looking at earlier combined with the event handler is set TestComplete up to automatically email you log files in the event that a test fails. There's a lot of moving pieces in there, but that's just an example of some of the neat things you can do once you've got this fleshed out.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Nick. So let's answer a few more questions because it looks like we have a lot in there, and then we'll move on to regular expressions. Okay. So this one's from Arnaut Dom. The use of TestComplete library seems not very efficient to me. Is there a way to find library functions easier and see in which scripts they are used? Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to see, what or where your functions are, you can always use the control find or control F function within TestComplete. So that will allow you to search your whole project suite to find that function.
We also have the code explorer that lives on the left side. We're not going to get too deep in it today because we've got other things we'd like to show you, but this helps you get additional metrics with regards to your scripting.
All right, let's take a couple more.
Oh, here's a good one. This isn't directly related to scripting, but it is a question nonetheless, and it's asking, hey, can TestComplete tests be said to run with TeamCity builds? Now, it absolutely can. One of the really neat things about TestComplete is that TestComplete has its own command line interface that you can hit right through the Windows command prompt. That means any tool you've got out there, anything at all that can hit that command line and send those commands is going to be able to invoke TestComplete. You can use it to run individual tests, entire project suites. It's entirely up to you. There's a ton of flexibility in there. Here's another question. Is try-catch compatible with all scripting languages? And the answer is yes. There's that structure within every language we support. So if that's something that seems interesting to you, if that's something you need, then you're fine.
All right, let's take one more and then we'll jump into regular expressions. So Abdus Salam asks, can TestComplete handle any unexpected error during the runtime? So yes, absolutely. There is a specific event within test or available within TestComplete called unexpected window. So that would be one version of it. There's a couple others as well.
Yeah. So building on that answer, TestComplete is not omnipotent. If you throw it enough of a curveball, it's not going to know what to do. That said, if you know your application, you know what it can get up to, you've got an understanding of the kind of things that we could reasonably expect to happen, you'll absolutely be able to build out a framework designed to recover from all of the problems you experience.
Okay. So actually one more, because it's pretty relevant here. Well, actually to exception handling. So Timothy Davis had asked, is this a TestComplete exception or an app exception? So that one, the example that I had shown would be a TestComplete exception.
Yeah, these try, catch, finally blocks in your scripts, they are catching exceptions related to the scripts themselves. TestComplete doesn't have a level of insight into your specific application that it knows that your app threw an exception. There are ways you can detect such things, but it doesn't have the innate ability to know, wait a minute, that function misfired.
Yeah, there. Just as a side note, we actually have a separate product which is called AQ Time that could actually allow or help you profile your code, which could help you in situations such as that. Okay, so with that said, let's jump over to our regular expressions example. So here I have a function. I'm just running a notepad, or I'm opening notepad. And then within there, I'm trying to find the caption notepad, or I'm looking for the caption of the window. Then I'm clicking on a menu item, opening that up, and changing the font. So we're using regular expressions and a couple of these parameters here. So for instance, here where I'm using the find method within this notepad variable, I'm saying, okay, find a win caption that contains, it can contain anything before notepad, but it has to contain notepad. So we can see we're using a wildcard right here.
Regular expressions are another thing that's common across all languages. This is one of the most powerful things you can do within your scripts. Regular expressions are the top dog when it comes to filtering out information and getting only what you need. That said, regular expressions are not the most intuitive thing in the world to just hop in and lay down. Not at all. And where you hear, you could see Ian shaking his head in agreement as I say that. There are a ton of web pages out there that'll guide you through building out your regular expressions. So if you have a need, if you know that you need to just make sure this little bit of text is visible in this huge mountain of data you're getting passed back, regular expressions are going to be the way to go. They're going to help you filter out that data so that you're only working with what you need to be working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to point out the other two examples here. So we're using the regular expression in a very similar fashion here. We're passing it into the find child method and saying, okay, find the W item list or an object with the W item list that equals this value. So in this case, we're using the wildcard again, and we're saying, okay, it can equal anything before Western. It has to include Western. And it has to include Arabic as well. But anything in between those two characters, or two phrases rather, it can be anything else enclosed in there. All right, so that's just a basic example of a regular expression and how to implement it within TestComplete. Also, as a side note, you can even use it within your name mapping, which I'm sure some of you may be already aware of. Okay. So we just have 2 more topics left, and it looks like we have 10 minutes. So let's just jump right into timers, and we'll take a couple questions after that, and then we'll wrap everything up with calling asynchronous properties as well as methods.
Yeah, and if we run a little bit close to end time, we will make sure we leave time for questions at the end. So we'll have time to sneak some last ones in there if you've still got questions rolling around.
All right, so I just need to pull up my AQ performance function here. So right here, this is demonstrating how we can use a timer within TestComplete. So maybe we're loading a web application and we want to see how long it takes to load. That would be a perfect example to use a timer within TestComplete. So we can say at a certain point in our script, start a timer, and then perform a bunch of actions. And then we could have TestComplete return what the value of that timer is once it's done loading. So this is particularly useful if you want to judge the performance of your applications regarding time to load. But there's various other ways that you can use it as well.
Timers are exceptional for tracking performance of your application over time. They're one of the best ways to ensure that the different elements within our page are being loaded successfully and in a timely fashion. And you can actually use timers as a form of checkpoint. I was working with a client last month who had a little bit of asynchronous JavaScript floating around their web page, and they wanted to make sure that it was up and ready to go within a reasonable amount of time. You're able to use the timers to validate things like ensuring that that object appeared within 5 seconds or however amount of time is acceptable to you.
Yeah, exactly. So like Nick had just mentioned, you can use them as checkpoints, which, a lot of people do. I just want to point out some of the specifics of it. So here you can set the time. In this case, it's 1 second. That may be a little unrealistic in terms of load times in some cases. Also, you can specify what TestComplete outputs in the log as well as in the indicator. So that's what those 2 other strings are in there. Okay, so let's take a few questions and then we're going to move into our last topic. All right. Okay, so this one's from Megan Ozan. Will this be called at the start of a test run or for each test within the run? So I believe you're referring to that on-start test event handler. So that would be called or invoked at the start of every test. That's essentially what the event handler would be doing there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of it as a global setting.
Yeah. So here's a good question from Lucio. So can we take these scripts we've written and the keyword tests we've recorded and combine them without any restrictions? And the answer is yes. It's actually as easy as dragging and dropping. We built this in with a very specific purpose in mind. We need you to be able to bounce between these 2 things. Like I said, putting barriers within our application, things you can't do, is only going to make your life harder. Having this ability to include scripts and keyword tests and vice versa is going to let your team work really well, even if you've got differing skill levels, or even if it's just yourself going at it alone. It'll help you mix and match and only use scripts for when you really need them, or alternatively, only use keyword tests for when you feel you really need that.
All right, so we'll take one more and then we got to jump into our last topic because we're running short on time here. So Saeed Ahmed had asked, so I can use event handler to fetch data from Excel file? And yes, you absolutely can. So you can do anything within an event handler that you can do within TestComplete. There's virtually no limitations there.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump into our last topic, which is calling methods asynchronously. So let me just give you a quick overview of it, and then we'll go into the specifics. So this where you would want to use an asynchronous call would be if you want to essentially break out of the execution and perform an action. And perhaps Nick could speak a little more to that.
Yeah, I absolutely can. So here's a great example. So let's say that we have an application that gives us a pop-up window. But to complete that pop-up window action, maybe it needs an input of some kind. Perhaps we need to query information from the application itself, not the pop-up window. That said, there will be situations where you actually can't query that object, that original application, while the modal window, the pop-up window, is live. This asynchronous functionality will let you request information from the application without disrupting the ability to interact with the modal window. This asynchronous functionality, this is a really heavy topic. There's a lot you can do with it, and it requires a pretty good understanding of how scripts actually work. We wanted to throw it in here just as a kind of capstone, so to speak, of this, because this demonstrates some of the really advanced features available within the tool. Being able to take your scripts and have them execute so it's not going line by line, and instead being intelligent about where it's using the different resources is one of the ways you can ensure that the scripts you create are resilient and work, even as your application evolves.
Awesome. Yeah. Going even further, so I had mentioned previously that one of the events for the event handler is unexpected window. So maybe you want to put this asynchronous call within that event handler of an unexpected window. So, hey, when an unexpected window pops up, perform this action here. In this case, an asynchronous method call.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that is all we had to show you today. That said, we're not going anywhere just yet. We're going to go ahead and comb through and tackle as many questions as we can with the time we have left. Before we do that, one last shout out. If your question is not answered, if you need it answered, reach right out and we'll make sure we can tackle it for you.
All right, so let's take some questions here. This one's from Amy Delano. Can name mapping be done within a script, and or can map names from a previous script be pulled into a new one so it doesn't have to be done manually every time? And yes, absolutely you can. So there's actually a specific object for the name mapping, and it's called name mapping.
Shocker.
So I can access my name mapping via script. Maybe I want to change my configuration. So for those of you who are unaware, you can actually have various versions, if you will, of your name mapping within a single name mapping.
That's great for localization and such, where the text being displayed on screen might flip based on the language or region settings you've imposed.
Yeah, so also we can access the objects directly. So maybe we want to jump into our name mapping a little bit. Maybe we want to add a named child. Maybe we want to call a browser. There's a lot of different things we can do in here.
So moving on down, Janine asked if we have any tutorials for learning how to script for people who maybe have no scripting experience at all. So the answer to that is we do have a few. One of the things we're actually working on internally is building out better Academy classes, and not just webinars like the one you'd attend now, but videos on demand that you can then access whenever you need. Keep your ear to the ground. We're working on rolling that out. Honestly, as we speak, it's being worked on. So while we don't have the most comprehensive set now, it is absolutely coming. Here's one. This isn't directly tied to what we've seen, but it is a question. So can TestComplete be set to run with Jenkins for continuous integration? And the answer is yes. Earlier on, I mentioned that TestComplete has its own command line interface. So in theory, any tool can invoke TestComplete. But in the case of Jenkins, we actually have our own built-out integration. This means that just by downloading a completely free Jenkins plugin, you'll be able to specify when these tests should be triggered as part of your build process.
Okay, so it looks like we're at the top of the hour. So let's take two more questions, and then we'll sign off. So one is from Belm. Can I send the log error message only one line, not the whole log in on error event? And yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be an extensive thing. It could just be, one action per your example.
Here's one more. So can TestComplete handle user-defined exceptions? And the answer to that is yes. They will have to be defined by you, however. It can work with them once you've got them in place.
Getting an error while launching my application for the first time. Internet Explorer cannot display the web page. After refresh, able to access page. How to handle this exception in TestComplete? Sure. So the thing with IE is it tends to hang in memory. So I would try, terminating the process either before or after your tests.
Another thing you can do, if you've got maybe spotty internet and you need to refresh the page if it doesn't load correctly, you could create an if statement that looks for objects within the page. And if they're present, you're good to go. But if they don't show up, you can send a command for the page to be refreshed. That's the kind of logic that TestComplete is designed to support.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.